In this second audio slideshow on Egypt, in which we'll cover the last two of the four kingdoms, the Amarna period and the New Kingdom, the return of the New Kingdom, or another way to say something returned is redux, New Kingdom redux. Let's start off by thinking about various representations of the pharaoh and what that means. Going back to the very first of our six kingdoms, by the early dynastic time, kings are revered as gods in human form. Three different entities in one. Not quite the same idea as something like the Rosetta Stone, one text depicted in three different languages. But again, this idea not just of duality, but of multiplicity. When we get to the Amarna period, however, and the kingdom, the reign of Akhenaten, we are looking at a complete reversal of today the traditional polytheistic Egyptian religion to the monotheistic instituted only during this one period in the Amarna period by Akhenaten. In looking at these different pharaohs, Khafre, Hatshepsut, Menkaure and his queen, and here we can see too that she is actually tenderly hugging him with her right hand as she reaches across to hold him with her left. Narmar. How do we consider a ruler? And how was this idea, this concept, upended by Akhenaten's reign? To start with, when he was 17, Amenhotep III recreates himself as Akhenaten. When I think about him as someone, in some sense, like a pop star, like David Bowie recreated himself into Ziggy Stardust and other various characters, figures. Akhenaten, as we can see here, is a distinctly different kind of looking pharaoh than we just saw with Narmar, with Khafre, with Menkaure. Just look at his body shape. It's curvaceous. He has hips and a distended abdomen. He's quite androgynous, female looking. Full lips, broader cheekbones, this narrow face. What does he do that's most notable? Along with Hatshepsut and Ramses, Akhenaten challenged tradition. All three of them challenged precepts of Egyptian society and civilization and made tremendous changes in the direction of this society. Akhenaten went a step further by dismantling, again, this idea of polytheistic religion and replacing with it with a monotheistic one in which the sun god Aten was the sole god who was worshipped. He also set up himself and his queen Nefertiti as the only god and goddess representative. This was in itself was novel. Think of them as like the Kardashian West couple of their day. Again, there's a drastic change in representation when we get to Akhenaten. The idea of this sole god, the whole state system based on a priest class, is also undone as part of this institutionalizing of monotheism and setting up himself and his wife Nefertiti as the sole priestess in this era. This is quite a marvelous depiction. This image is Akhenaten and his family, and of course Nefertiti too, under the disc, under the gaze of the Sun King whom they worship. This is Sun Ra. There, as of late, perhaps not coincidentally, has been a resurgence of an American 1960s, 70s movement called Afrofuturism. It's represented in literature as well as in music. Sun Ra declared that he had a vision. He kind of got space shipped up to Saturn and came back. He claimed he had this visionary experience when he was a college student that completely changed his life. He was a respectable jazz phenomenon. He traveled and performed as Sun Ra and his orchestra. As you can see here, the singer on the lower right is June Taylor. And Sun Ra is the, let's call him, to me anyway, the contemporary reincarnation of this idea of worshiping a sun king. Even hippies during the 70s and the late 60s and the early 70s, who were accustomed to, let's say, psychedelic acts, were rather bewildered by the orchestra. When he rolled through town, his entourage would be, and group would be composed of 20 to 30 singers, dancers, fire eaters. There was elaborate lighting. He was quite a phenomenon of his time. The more recent advent of Afrofuturism, in the way that it imagines certainly a more hopeful future for African Americans, is something that I have included a brief clip on our second week for anyone who is interested. Nefertiti was perhaps the first sex goddess of her age, a power in her own right. We see the bust of Nefertiti as the first time that we're seeing a bust, not a full body sculpture. And she is someone who has existed throughout the ages as a symbol of women in power and as a woman who shared power and was granted power by her mate. So while she's different than Hatshepsut in many ways, they are the two together most outstanding representatives of female reign and control, of societal control in Egypt. This idea that she would do a nude striptease to tease the sun into rising every morning is quite an amusing one. Whether or not that was true, she certainly was, if not the power behind her mate, was certainly standing right beside him. When we get to the tomb of Tutankhamun in the New Kingdom, we go back to tradition. We return to a more recognizable Egypt. This was, as we see at the beginning of lecture slide 1, the most notable Egyptian exhibition ever traveled, ever created. It was a worldwide phenomenon from the time that the archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1923. And again, this is what this event was the one upon which the movie The Mummy in 1932 was made, and Subsequent Virgin, 1999, and many other ways that this idea has infiltrated, that the concept of what mummies meant and the mystery of them has perplexed and fascinated society ever since then. Here's the archaeological site of the discovery of the Tutankhamun complex. And we see this in the funerary mask of Tutankhamun on the left. Quite a difference between that and his predecessor. So no more Aten, no more reign of Akhenaten. Tutankhamun is returned again to the more traditional worship and religions of Egypt. And what was he also most noted for? Glitz, gold, remarkable examples resulting from that excavation of the tomb of Tutankhamun. When we move into the New Kingdom and the funerary temple of Ramses, along with Hatshepsut and Akhenaten, one of the three most change-making pharaohs of Egypt, what is most distinctive about his reign is his funerary temple. Massive carvings into the hillside of his royal family. The Ramses temple really shows you what you can do when you set out to create huge homages to self. A striking fact about this is that this had to be moved. When the Aswan Dam in Egypt was planned and the building of it was put on track, the organization UNESCO got behind this, and this entire complex was moved to another site in order for it not to be submerged when Egypt built a hydroelectric dam on the Nile. Massive undertaking, impressive feat. Finally, we will end up with a quick look at the Book of the Dead. The Book of the Dead and the Judgment of Hunefer is the only recording of this time on papyrus that shows a summary of the scope of traditional, by that I mean non-Akhenaten time, Egyptian religion, polytheistic, and the idea of how the soul was weighed on a balance against that of a feather to determine the merit of that soul to enter the afterlife.